What if Mace Windu recruited new Jedi? Full script: he didn't die. The most dangerous Jedi Master in the galaxy, falling from that Senate building window, consumed by Palpatine's lightning, betrayed by Anakin Skywalker. Everyone assumed he was dead. The Empire certainly did. But Mace Windu survived. And he was angry, not the blind rage that consumed Anakin. Something colder, more calculating. Because while his body healed in the shadows of Coruscant's underworld, Mace Windu realized something that would change everything. The Jedi Order deserved to die. Its rigid rules, its blind obedience, its refusal to adapt had led them straight into Palpatine's trap. But the galaxy still needed protectors. It needed warriors who understood that emotions weren't weaknesses. Who knew that sometimes caring deeply about something was the only reason worth fighting. So Mace Windu decided to build something new. Not Jedi, not Sith, something the galaxy had never seen before. And when Darth Vader finally discovered that his old master was alive, recruiting Force sensitives across the galaxy, training them to fight without the old order's restrictions, everything changed. The Empire suddenly faced a threat they never prepared for. Force users who refused to hide, who embraced their emotions, who turned the Sith's own tactics against them. This is the story of what happened when the most pragmatic Jedi Master in history survived Order 66 and decided, the old ways were finished. Let's start with the fall itself. Mace's body plummets through Coruscant's endless cityscape. Lightning burns still searing across his skin. His right hand, severed by Anakin's lightsaber, is gone. Pain radiates through every nerve. But Mace Windu didn't become a master of Vapid, the most dangerous lightsaber form ever created, by giving up when things got difficult. As he falls, instinct takes over. The Force flows through him. Not the serene, passive force of the Jedi Temple. Something more primal, more desperate. He reaches out with sheer will, slowing his descent, guiding himself toward a landing platform. He crashes through an awning, tumbles across Duracrete, and finally comes to rest in a shadowed alley. Broken, bleeding, but breathing. Around him, the galaxy erupts into chaos. Order 66 echoes across every clone trooper's system. In the temple, in war zones across the Outer Rim, on peaceful planets where Jedi served as diplomats, his brothers and sisters are being cut down by the very soldiers they fought beside. Mace can feel it through the Force. Thousands of lights being extinguished. Screams cut short. Younglings running in terror. The pain threatens to consume him entirely. But pain is something Mace Windu understands better than most. He built his entire fighting style around channeling emotion without losing control. So even as his body screams in agony, even as his connection to the Force shows him the massacre unfolding across the galaxy, he focuses on one single thought: survival. For days, Mace hides in the lower levels of Coruscant, moving through maintenance tunnels and abandoned sectors that even the Empire's forces overlook in their rush to consolidate power. He scavenges, he steals, and slowly he begins to heal. His hand is gone. His body is battered beyond anything he's experienced. But his connection to the Force remains strong. And as he heals physically, something else begins to change within him. The old Mace Windu would have immediately tried to contact other survivors, would have rushed to save whoever he could, would have thrown himself against the Empire with righteous fury. But this Mace, watching the galaxy transform through stolen data terminals, seeing Palpatine's face as he declares himself Emperor, understands something crucial. The Jedi Order didn't just lose a battle. They lost because they were fundamentally flawed. Think about it from his perspective. For 1,000 years, the Jedi claimed there were no Sith. They grew complacent, bureaucratic, more concerned with politics than with the Force itself. They took children from their families for bad emotional connections, taught suppression rather than understanding. They served the Republic so blindly that they couldn't see the Republic itself was the threat. Mace had always been more pragmatic than his fellow council members, but even he had followed these rules, had enforced them. He'd been harsh with Anakin, pushing him away rather than trying to understand him. He'd allowed the council to become enforcers and generals rather than guardians of peace. And now, everyone had paid the price. As weeks turn into months, as Mace Windu slowly regains his strength in the shadows of Coruscant, a new philosophy begins to crystallize in his mind. The Jedi Order needed to die. Its rigid structures, its outdated dogma, its arrogant blindness, all of it had led to this moment. But the galaxy still needed Jedi. It needed people who could stand against tyranny, who understood the Force, who could protect those who couldn't protect themselves. What it didn't need was another Jedi Order built on the same mistakes. If Mace was going to rebuild, he would do it his way. No more hiding from emotion. No more pretending darkness didn't exist. No more taking children and separating them from their families. And absolutely no more blind service to corrupt institutions. His first recruit comes by accident. Her name is Zara, a young Twi'lek woman, barely 20, who'd been working as a mechanic in the lower levels. Mace senses her Force sensitivity immediately when she passes his hiding spot. It's raw, untrained, powerful. She doesn't even know she has it. Just thinks she's got good instincts, lucky reflexes. He watches her for days, seeing how she helps others in the community, how she stands up to the gangs that try to extort protection money, how she risks herself for people she barely knows. This is what the old order missed, he realizes. They only took children, thinking older students were too dangerous, too set in their ways. But this young woman has something no Jedi youngling ever had. She's lived. She's struggled. She knows what it means to fight for survival. She has something worth fighting for beyond abstract ideals. Mace reveals himself to her carefully. He's still wanted. Still hunted. His face plastered on Imperial bulletins as a traitor to the Republic. But he shows her the Force. Just small things at first. Objects moving without being touched. Her own latent abilities awakened under his guidance. She's terrified at first, knowing what the Empire does to Force sensitives. Having heard the stories of the Inquisitors hunting down anyone with even a hint of power. But Mace doesn't offer her the false security of a great temple or an ancient order. He offers her truth. The galaxy is becoming darker every day. People like them, people who can touch the Force, have a choice. Hide and hope the Empire never finds them. Or learn to fight back. Not as mystical monks pretending emotions don't exist, but as warriors who understand that caring about others, feeling fear and anger and love, these things don't make you weak. They make you human. And humanity is worth fighting for. Zara's training begins in earnest. Mace has no lightsaber anymore, his having been lost in his fall, so he teaches her hand-to-hand combat first, blending Jedi techniques with practical street fighting. He teaches her to feel the Force, not as some distant energy to be serenely contemplated, but as an extension of herself, of her will, of her determination to protect what matters. When she gets angry during training, he doesn't tell her to suppress it. He teaches her to acknowledge it, understand it, channel it without losing control. It's a delicate balance. The same balance he'd walked with Vapid for years. But Zara proves to be a quick study. She's motivated in a way that younglings raised in the temple never were. She knows what she's fighting for because she's lived without it. As Zara's training progresses, Mace begins to carefully expand his search for others. Through old contacts, through whispers in the underworld, through careful use of the Force, he identifies Force-sensitive individuals across Coruscant and eventually beyond. But he's selective in a way the old order never was. He's not looking for children to indoctrinate. He's looking for people who've already proven themselves. who've already shown they'll fight for something beyond themselves. A former Republic soldier who deserted when he saw what the Empire was becoming. A doctor who treats the poor in the slums despite constant Imperial harassment. A pilot who smuggles refugees away from worlds where the Empire's grip tightens into genocide. Each recruitment is careful, methodical. Mace has learned patience in these months of hiding. He doesn't approach these people with grand promises or ancient authority. He simply shows them what they are, what they could become, and what they could fight for. Some refuse, too scared of the Empire's reach, too comfortable in their current lives. Mace lets them go with a warning to keep their abilities hidden. But others, those who've already been fighting in their own small ways, they see the opportunity for what it is. A chance to make a real difference. A chance to be part of something larger than themselves without losing themselves in the process. Within a year of Order 66, Mace Windu has assembled a small group of 12 Force-sensitive individuals. They're not Jedi, not in the traditional sense. They're too old by the old Order's standards. Too emotionally connected to the world around them. Too willing to acknowledge their own darkness. But they're powerful, motivated, and growing stronger every day under Mace's tutelage. He teaches them lightsaber combat, though acquiring kyber crystals proves challenging until one of his students discovers a small cache in a forgotten Jedi outpost. Through his intelligence network, carefully built over months of work, Mace learns that both Obi-Wan Kenobi and Yoda survived Order 66. Obi-Wan is on Tatooine, watching over Luke Skywalker. Yoda has gone into exile on Dagobah. Both are hiding, waiting for some future moment when the Skywalker children might be ready to face the Empire. The old way. Train them from childhood. Keep them isolated. Prepare them for some grand destiny. When Mace learns this, he feels something he rarely experienced as a Jedi Master: disappointment. Here are two of the greatest Jedi who ever lived. And they're hiding, waiting, hoping that children who don't even know what they are will somehow save the galaxy 2 decades from now. It's the ultimate expression of everything that was wrong with the Jedi Order. They always look to the future, to prophecies and chosen ones. While the present burned around them, Mace makes a controversial decision. He won't contact Obi-Wan or Yoda. He won't seek their approval or their guidance. Because if he does, they'll try to stop him. They'll say he's too emotional, too aggressive, too willing to embrace the darkness. They'll invoke the Jedi Code, warn him about the path to the dark side, tell him that his methods will only create more Sith, and maybe they'd be right to worry. Vapid was always controversial precisely because it required channeling dark side energy. What Mace is teaching his students goes even further. He's telling them it's okay to feel, to love, to get angry when they see injustice. He's walking a razor's edge, and he knows it. But he also knows that the alternative, the Jedi way that Yoda and Obi-Wan still cling to, already failed. The galaxy can't afford to wait 20 years for a maybe. The group relocates to a remote moon in the Outer Rim, a place called Iridia. It's barely inhabited. Mostly mining operations that were abandoned when the Republic fell and trade routes shifted. Perfect for staying hidden while building something real. Here, Mace begins to expand his training operation. His original 12 students start bringing in others they've identified. People who need protection from the Inquisitors. Force-sensitive children whose families are desperate to hide them from Imperial purges. Mace's new order begins to take real shape, but there's a philosophical split forming even within his group. Some students, especially the younger ones, want to embrace Mace's teachings fully. They see the wisdom in acknowledging emotions, in staying connected to loved ones, in fighting not as detached monks, but as people with something to lose. But others, particularly those who'd had some Jedi training before Order 66, they struggle. They were raised with the code, with the idea that attachment leads to suffering, that emotions lead to the dark side. They see Mace's methods as dangerous, too close to falling. And honestly, they're not entirely wrong to worry. This is where we need to talk about the real danger of what Mace Windu is doing. The Jedi Code existed for reasons. Attachment does lead to suffering. Fear does lead to anger, anger to hate, hate to suffering. Anakin Skywalker is the ultimate proof of this. His attachment to Padme, his fear of losing her. These things drove him to become Darth Vader. So when Mace tells his students that love and connection are not weaknesses, that they can embrace these things without falling, he's taken an enormous risk. Because what if he's wrong? What if one of his students faces the same choice Anakin did and makes the same decision? What if, in trying to avoid the Jedi Order's mistakes, Mace creates something even worse? These concerns come to a head when one of Mace's students, a young man named Kale who'd been a Padawan when Order 66 happened, begins to show troubling signs. He's growing more aggressive in training, using his anger to fuel his power. When he goes on missions against Imperial targets, he's brutal, showing no mercy even to enemies who surrender. Mace recognizes the signs because he's seen them in himself, wrestled with them every time he used Vapid. The difference is, Mace had decades of training, iron discipline, a deep understanding of his own darkness before he ever attempted that balance. Kale is young, traumatized by watching his master die, driven by hatred of the Empire. He's channeling dark side, energy without the control to prevent it from consuming him. Mace faces his first real test as a teacher and leader. In the old order, Kale would likely be expelled or at least removed from active duty, sent to meditate and suppress his emotions until he found balance. But Mace has been teaching that emotions aren't the enemy. So how does he handle a student who's proving that maybe, just maybe, the old Jedi were right about attachment and emotion leading to darkness? This is the moment that defines what Mace's new order will become. He doesn't expel Kale. He doesn't tell him to suppress his anger or his hatred. Instead, Mace does something the old order would never have done. He sits down with Kale and has a brutally honest conversation. He talks about his own struggles with darkness, about every time he's used Vapid and felt the pull toward giving in completely. He shares his failure with Anakin, admits that his harshness and unwillingness to show understanding probably pushed Anakin further toward Palpatine. He opens up about his own anger at the Empire, his own desire for revenge against Palpatine and Vader, and then he explains the difference between acknowledging these feelings and being controlled by them. The conversation is long, lasting through the night, and it's more therapy session than Jedi lecture. Mace explains that feeling anger at injustice is appropriate, even necessary. But slaughtering surrendered enemies isn't about justice. It's about making yourself feel powerful, about feeding your own darkness. He challenges Kale to examine why he really wants to fight. Is it to protect people and make the galaxy better? Or is it to satisfy his own need for revenge? Because if it's the latter, then he's not fighting for the light. He's just another person letting the dark side use him. It works, but barely. Kale pulls back from the edge, becomes more controlled, more focused on the actual mission rather than his personal vendetta. But the incident shakes some of the other students. A few leave, deciding that Mace's methods are too dangerous, that they'd rather hide and hope for the best than risk falling to darkness. Mace lets them go with his blessing, understanding that his path isn't for everyone. But those who stay, they're more committed than ever. They've seen the danger, acknowledged it, and chosen to face it anyway. They understand that being a Force user in this galaxy means walking a dangerous path. And there are no guarantees. As Mace's order grows over the next several years, they begin to actively oppose the Empire. Not in grand, suicidal gestures, but in careful, strategic operations. They rescue Force-sensitive children before Inquisitors can find them. They sabotage Imperial weapons facilities. They provide security for early rebel cells forming across the galaxy. And they hunt Inquisitors. This last activity is the most controversial and the most dangerous. Inquisitors are former Jedi who fell to the dark side, twisted by torture and the promise of power under Vader's command. The old Jedi Order would have tried to redeem them, to save them from darkness. Mace's approach is more pragmatic. He offers redemption once. If an Inquisitor refuses, if they continue hunting and murdering Force-sensitive children, then they're eliminated. It's a dark stance, one that would horrify Obi-Wan and Yoda if they knew about it. But Mace sees it as necessary. Every Inquisitor they spare is another dozen innocents who'll die. In war, sometimes there are no good choices, only less terrible ones. The first time Mace's group encounters an Inquisitor is 18 months after Order 66. They're on a core world called Balmorra, trying to evacuate a Force-sensitive teenager before the Inquisitors tracking her can arrive. But they're too slow, and the seventh sister, along with the fifth brother, arrive first. The fight is brutal. Mace's students are skilled, well-trained, but Inquisitors are former Jedi with years of experience, enhanced by dark side power and Sith training. 2 of Mace's students die in the fight. Another is seriously wounded. But they win, barely, and Mace himself faces the seventh sister in single combat. He's built himself a new lightsaber by this point, and he's chosen the color carefully. Not purple this time. That was the color of a Jedi Master walking the line between light and dark. This time, his crystal shines white. It's a purified Kyber crystal, taken from an Inquisitor's weapon and cleansed of dark side corruption. It represents what he's trying to build, what he's trying to be. Not light, not dark, but something purified from both. The fight with the seventh sister is everything you'd expect. Mace is older now, injured, not at his peak. But he's also motivated in a way he never was as a Jedi Master. He's not fighting for the Republic or some abstract concept of peace. He's fighting for his students, for the innocents the Empire would murder, for a future where the Force isn't just a tool for tyrants and religious extremists. When he has the seventh sister at his mercy, her weapon destroyed, her connection to the Force temporarily disrupted by his assault, he does something interesting. He offers her a choice. Leave the Inquisitorius, abandon the Empire, and he'll help her find redemption. Not the Jedi version of redemption, all meditation and denial, but real redemption through action, through fighting for something better than herself. She laughs at him, tells him he's weak, that Vader will hunt him down and make him watch as everyone he cares about dies slowly. So Mace ends. News of Inquisitors being killed starts to spread through Imperial channels. Vader himself becomes aware that someone is actively opposing his hunting operations. He doesn't know it's Mace Windu yet. The Empire believes Windu died on Coruscant, but he knows someone is training Force users and teaching them to fight. This is unacceptable. The Sith rule of 2 has been broken by the Inquisitorius out of necessity, but they're all weak, controlled, no threat to Vader or his master. But a group of trained Force users, growing in skill and number, led by someone competent? That's a potential threat to everything Palpatine has built. Vader begins to hunt Mace's group personally, bringing the full weight of the Empire's resources to bear. This is when things get really dangerous for Mace and his students. They're forced to constantly move, constantly hide, losing people to Imperial ambushes. Their training facility on Iridia is discovered and destroyed. 12 students die when an Imperial Star Destroyer bombards the surface. Survivors scatter across the galaxy, going deep underground. For a while, it seems like the Empire has won. That Mace's dream of building a new kind of Force-using order is finished before it truly began. But Mace Windu is nothing if not persistent. Instead of being defeated by the losses, he adapts. He realizes they can't operate as a centralized group, can't maintain a single base or training facility. So he shifts to a cell structure, similar to what the rebellion is starting to do. Small groups of 2 or 3 students, scattered across the galaxy, operating independently but sharing intelligence. It makes them harder to destroy, but also harder to coordinate. Training becomes more difficult, more dangerous, but they survive. And slowly, they start to rebuild. This is also when Mace's group begins to intersect with the nascent rebellion. Around 3 years after the Empire's formation, 4 years before the Battle of Yavin and the original timeline, early rebel cells are starting to coalesce into something resembling an organized resistance. They're desperate for any advantage against the Empire, and Force users who can fight, who can provide security against Inquisitors, who can sense danger and ambush. They're incredibly valuable, but there's friction. The early rebellion includes former Republic senators, military officers, people who remember the Jedi Order with reverence. When they discover that Mace Windu is alive and training new Force users, they're ecstatic. They see it as a symbol, proof that the Jedi endure, that the Empire hasn't won. They want Mace to take up the mantle of Grand Master, to rebuild the Jedi Order properly, to be a symbol of hope for the galaxy. And Mace has to explain, repeatedly, that he's not trying to rebuild the Jedi Order. The Jedi Order failed. He's building something different, something better. And that means not being what they want him to be. These philosophical conflicts create interesting dynamics within the early rebellion. Some cells embrace Mace's people, grateful for their help regardless of their methods. Others refuse to work with them, seeing Mace's willingness to acknowledge darkness, to use aggressive tactics, to teach emotional connection as fundamentally wrong. Potentially even a path to creating new Sith. The rebellion becomes somewhat fractured between those who want any advantage against the Empire and those who'd rather lose nobly than compromise their ideals. Meanwhile, on Tatooine, Obi-Wan Kenobi begins to sense a disturbance in the Force. He's been living in isolation for years, watching over Luke from afar. But he's still connected to the Force, still able to feel major shifts and disturbances. He senses Force users being trained, senses battles between light and dark across the galaxy. At first, he thinks it might be more Inquisitors, or perhaps some dark side cult taking advantage of the Empire's chaos. But then he senses something familiar in the Force signatures, a particular flavor of determination, of controlled fury, of walking the line between light and dark. He realizes with growing shock that Mace Windu is alive. Obi-Wan is torn. Part of him is overjoyed that his old friend survived, that he's not completely alone among the old council. But another part is deeply worried. He can sense what Mace is doing, how he's training his students, and it's all wrong according to everything they were taught. He considers reaching out, offering guidance, trying to steer Mace back toward the traditional Jedi path. But he doesn't, ultimately, because he's afraid. Afraid that Mace will challenge his decision to hide on Tatooine. Afraid that Mace will ask why he's not fighting, not training others, not doing anything except waiting for a child to grow up. Afraid that he won't have good answers. On Dagobah, Yoda also senses what's happening. His connection to the Force is deeper than Obi-Wan's, and he's been meditating for years, trying to understand where the Order went wrong. When he realizes Mace survived and is training new Force users, his reaction is complex. He sees the potential for disaster, sees how close Mace is walking to the dark side. But he also sees something the old Order lacked: passion, commitment to the present rather than the future, a willingness to adapt and change rather than cling to tradition. Yoda begins to wonder if perhaps his plan, training Luke in isolation as they trained younglings of old, might be wrong. Maybe the future needs something different. But he's old, tired, uncertain. So like Obi-Wan, he does nothing. Simply watching and waiting to see what Mace's choices will bring. Let's talk about how this affects the timeline's major events. In the original history, the rebellion struggled for nearly 2 decades before the Battle of Yavin, constantly on the back foot against the Empire's overwhelming might. But with Mace Windu's people actively involved, things changed subtly but significantly. Rebel cells that would have been destroyed by Inquisitors survive. Intelligence operations that would have failed due to Force-using Imperial agents succeed. Recruiting is easier because people see that Force users, people who can stand up to the Empire's dark side wielders, are part of the rebellion. The rebellion isn't winning, not even close, but they're surviving better, growing faster than they did originally. However, this also means the Empire takes the rebellion more seriously earlier. Vader's attention is divided between hunting Mace's group and dealing with rebel threats. Palpatine begins to worry that the rebellion might have Force users trained well enough to actually threaten his rule. This leads to harsher crackdowns, more resources devoted to counterinsurgency, atrocities that might have been delayed or prevented, happening earlier as the Empire tries to crush any resistance before it grows too strong. One of the most fascinating aspects of this alternate timeline is what happens with Force-sensitive children. In the original history, after Order 66, being Force-sensitive was essentially a death sentence. The Inquisitors would find you, and you'd either be killed or turned into another Inquisitor. Families with Force-sensitive children lived in terror. But with Mace's network operating, there's suddenly another option. Families can reach out to the underground, and Mace's people will come. We'll take their children somewhere safe. We'll train them to hide or even to fight back. It's not a perfect system. They can't save everyone. But it's hope where there was none before. This creates an interesting moral dilemma, though. Parents have to decide whether to let their children be taken and trained as warriors, possibly never seeing them again, or to try to hide them and hope the Inquisitors never come. And even if they let their children go with Mace's people, they have to live with the knowledge that they're sending them into danger, training them to fight in a war against the most powerful government the galaxy has ever seen. Some parents refuse, choosing to hide their children instead, hoping for a normal life. And sometimes those families get discovered, and the children die or worse. Mace carries that weight, knowing that his network can't save everyone, that every child he doesn't reach might be another victim. As we approach the time period where Luke and Leia would be coming of age, around the time of A New Hope in the original timeline, Mace Windu's order has grown significantly. He's got maybe 50 fully trained Force users scattered across the galaxy, another 100 in various stages of training, and an intelligence network that rivals anything the rebellion has. They've killed or driven away most of the Inquisitors, making Force-sensitive people across the galaxy marginally safer. They've pulled off successful operations against Imperial facilities, rescued hundreds of prisoners, provided critical support to rebel cells. By any measure, they're a success, but Mace himself is struggling. He's in his 60s now, still powerful but aging, carrying the weight of everyone who's died under his command. He's watched students fall in battle, seen people he trained get captured and tortured by the Empire, dealt with the constant fear that he's leading people down a path to darkness. Some of his students have fallen, given into hatred and revenge, had to be stopped by their fellows before they became what they were fighting against. Not many, but enough that Mace lies awake some nights wondering if Yoda was right, if maybe the old ways existed for good reasons. This is when we need to talk about Vader and the inevitable confrontation between him and Mace. Vader has known for several years by this point that Mace Windu survived. Imperial intelligence finally connected the reports of a powerful Force user training others with Windu's disappearance. Vader has been hunting him specifically, not just as a threat to. One possibility is that the Death Star is destroyed, but at much higher cost. Maybe Mace leads an infiltration team personally. Maybe he confronts Vader on the battle station while Luke flies the trench run. Maybe Mace finally falls, sacrificing himself to ensure the Death Star's destruction, giving Luke time to make the shot. It would be a fitting end for his character, dying not in a fall from a window but in a blaze of glory, taking down the Empire's ultimate weapon. His last act could be saving his students, proving that the new path he forged was worth it, that embracing emotion and fighting for something beyond abstract ideals was the right choice. Alternatively, maybe Mace survives Yavin and the story continues with him training more Force users, building his order larger, creating a genuine threat to the Sith. This could lead to Palpatine taking more direct action, perhaps even leaving Coruscant to hunt down Mace personally. A confrontation between them would be apocalyptic. Mace nearly beat Palpatine once, and that was before years of fighting and refining his technique. Older, wiser, more pragmatic, and supported by his students. He might actually win, or he might lose. But in losing, he might wound Palpatine severely enough to change the course of the war. The broader impact on the galaxy is significant. With Force users actively fighting alongside the rebellion, the perception of the Jedi and the Force itself shifts. People see that Force users aren't just mystical relics from the past or terrifying inquisitors. They're people, fighting and dying for freedom, using their powers to protect others. This could lead to a broader acceptance of Force sensitivity, maybe even cultural shifts where families don't hide Force-sensitive children, but seek training for them. The Empire's propaganda about the Jedi being traitors becomes harder to maintain when people can see Force users actively opposing tyranny. However, this also creates new problems. If Force sensitivity becomes less stigmatized, more people start identifying themselves publicly. This makes them targets for Imperial repression. Entire communities might be wiped out just for harboring Force users. The Empire might develop new anti-Force user technology, weapons and tactics specifically designed to counter them. We might see the creation of anti-Force user military units, specialized soldiers trained specifically to hunt and kill people like Mace's students. The war becomes even more brutal as both sides escalate. There's also the question of what happens to Mace's philosophy long term. He's built something new, something that works for him and his immediate students. But what happens when you have hundreds or thousands of Force users trained this way? The Jedi Code evolved over millennia for reasons. Large groups of Force users with emotional attachments, with strong feelings, with willingness to embrace anger and passion. This has the potential to create factions, conflicts, maybe even civil wars within the Order itself. Mace's personal discipline and charisma hold his people together. But what happens after he's gone? One possibility is that Mace's order splinters into different factions over time. Some follow his teachings closely, maintaining the balance between light and dark, fighting for others without losing themselves. Others drift toward the light, deciding that the old Jedi were right about suppressing emotion, trying to recreate what was lost. Still others drift toward darkness, deciding that if emotion is acceptable, then why not embrace anger fully? Why not use fear and hatred as tools? The galaxy could end up with not just Jedi and Sith, but multiple competing Force traditions, all claiming to have the right approach. This would actually be fascinating from a world-building perspective. Instead of the binary light versus dark, you'd have a spectrum. Pure light side users following the old Jedi ways, pure dark side users following the Sith tradition, and then various groups in between, trying to balance or blend aspects of both. Some focused on protection, others on justice, others on knowledge, others on power. The Force itself doesn't change, but understanding of it would become more nuanced, more complicated, more real. Let's consider what happens with Vader in this timeline. Repeatedly failing to kill Mace Windu, watching Force users oppose him successfully, seeing that the Jedi path didn't completely die. All of this chips away at his certainty. Vader's power comes partly from his absolute commitment to the dark side, his utter rejection of Anakin Skywalker's identity. But if there are Force users out there successfully using light and dark together, if someone like Mace can embrace emotion without falling completely, it raises questions Vader doesn't want to ask. What if Palpatine lied? What if there was a way to save Padme without becoming a Sith? What if Anakin Skywalker could have evolved beyond the Jedi Code without losing everything? These doubts don't redeem Vader, at least not quickly. He's committed too many atrocities, murdered too many people, burned too many bridges. But they create cracks in his psychological armor. Maybe when he eventually discovers Luke is his son, the revelation hits differently. In the original timeline, he tried to turn Luke to the dark side. In this timeline, with Luke trained by both Obi-Wan and Mace's people, already walking a middle path, maybe Vader sees a possibility. Maybe he sees that Luke represents what Anakin could have been, should have been. A Force user strong enough to embrace emotion without being destroyed by it. Who cares deeply about others without being controlled by attachment? Who fights without losing his soul? The confrontation between Luke and Vader in this timeline would be philosophically fascinating. Vader represents absolute submission to darkness, the belief that only through the dark side can you have the power to protect what you love, even though that very power destroyed what he loved. Luke represents synthesis, the idea that you can acknowledge darkness, use passion and emotion, without being consumed. He's proof that Vader was wrong, that there was another way. And Mace Windu, whether dead or alive at this point, is the one who made that path possible. Let's talk about Palpatine's perspective on all this. The Emperor is ancient, cunning, and absolutely committed to Sith dominance. He sees Mace Windu's order as both a threat and an opportunity. On one hand, Force users fighting against him, training others, refusing to die quietly. This is a problem. On the other hand, they're not traditional Jedi. They use their emotions. They walk close to darkness. This means they could potentially be turned, corrupted, used. Palpatine might try to infiltrate Mace's order, to plant seeds of discord, to encourage students to drift further toward darkness, until they become tools he can manipulate. Imagine Palpatine personally approaching some of Mace's students, offering them power, promising that they don't have to hide their strength or hold back anymore. Some would refuse immediately, their loyalty to Mace and his teachings too strong. But others, especially those who've lost people to the Empire, who are angry and hurt and desperate for revenge, they might listen, not because they want to become Sith, but because Palpatine's clever enough to frame it differently. He doesn't ask them to join him. He just offers knowledge, power, the tools to hurt the Empire more effectively. And by the time they realize they're being manipulated, they're already too far gone. This creates a scenario where Mace has to fight on multiple fronts. Against the Empire, obviously. Against Inquisitors and Sith, but also against the corruption of his own students. Against the very real possibility that his teachings, meant to avoid the Jedi Order's mistakes, might create something even worse. It's the ultimate test of his philosophy. Can you really teach people to use emotion and darkness safely? Or was he just arrogant enough to think he could succeed where the Jedi failed for millennia? The truth is probably somewhere in between. Some of Mace's students thrive under his teachings, becoming powerful, balanced, effective Force users who make the galaxy better. Others struggle, fall, become cautionary tales about the dangers of walking the edge. And a few, the exceptional ones like Luke, transcend both traditions entirely, becoming something new and better. The success rate doesn't have to be perfect for Mace's path to be valid. It just has to be better than the alternative, which was every Force-sensitive person either dying, becoming an Inquisitor, or hiding in fear. Now, let's consider the ultimate endgame. In the original timeline, Palpatine is eventually defeated when Vader redeems himself, sacrificing his life to destroy his master. But in this timeline, with Luke trained differently, with Mace Windu possibly still alive, with an entire order of Force users supporting the rebellion, the final confrontation could be very different. Maybe it's not just Luke facing the Emperor. Maybe it's Luke and Mace together. Maybe it's Luke, Leia, and a dozen of Mace's best students, all converging on the Imperial Palace to end the Sith once and for all. A battle like that would be unprecedented in Star Wars. Multiple powerful Force users, each with different fighting styles and Force techniques, facing down the most powerful Sith Lord in a millennium. Palpatine would be dangerous. Probably more dangerous than ever because he's had years to prepare for exactly this threat. But he's also arrogant, used to dominating Force users through superior power and cunning, facing a coordinated group who understand both light and dark, who fight for each other rather than personal power. This might be something even he can't overcome. Vader's role in this final battle is crucial. Does he fight alongside Palpatine against his son and the aftermath of the Emperor's defeat in this timeline would be fascinating. In the original story, the Empire collapsed relatively quickly into warlordism and fractured remnants. But in this timeline, with Force users integrated into the rebellion, with Mace Windu's order established across the galaxy, the transition might be more stable. Or it might be more chaotic, as different Force traditions compete for influence in the New Republic. Do Mace's people become the new Jedi Order? Do they resist institutionalization, remaining independent operators? Do they fracture into competing schools and traditions? Luke's role in shaping the post-Imperial galaxy becomes even more important in this timeline. He's uniquely positioned as someone trained in both old and new traditions, someone who embodies synthesis rather than rejection. He could become the bridge between Mace's pragmatic approach and the idealism of the traditional Jedi, creating a new order that learns from both. Or he might reject both entirely, deciding that Force users should serve the galaxy without forming orders or institutions at all. That every generation needs to find its own path without being bound by tradition. Leia's political role is also crucial. As someone who's Force-sensitive, trained by Mace's people, but primarily focused on governance and diplomacy, she represents a different model for how Force users can contribute to society. Not as mystical guardians or warriors, but as leaders who use their abilities to better understand people, to sense truth and deception, to guide the New Republic toward justice. Her example might inspire others to use the Force in non-combat roles, expanding understanding of what it means to be Force-sensitive. One of the most interesting long-term questions is what happens to the concept of the Jedi and Sith. The Jedi Order failed and was destroyed. The Sith were supposed to rule the galaxy, but were defeated. Mace Windu's order represents something different, but it's not perfect either. Maybe the lesson the galaxy learns is that trying to codify the Force into rigid traditions is the problem. Maybe the future is thousands of Force users, each finding their own balance, their own path, united by shared values rather than shared rules. A galaxy where the Force is understood not as a tool for religious orders or mystical warriors, but as a natural part of existence that some people can touch, use, and explore in their own ways. This would represent a fundamental shift in Star Wars mythology. Instead of the binary conflict between Jedi and Sith that's defined galactic history, you'd have plurality, diversity, evolution. Some Force users might still follow Jedi-like paths of service and restraint. Others might embrace darker aspects while staying committed to protecting others. Still others might use the Force primarily for knowledge, or healing, or art, or engineering. The Force itself doesn't change, but cultural understanding of it expands, matures, becomes more nuanced. Mace Windu's ultimate legacy in this timeline isn't just the Empire's defeat or even his students' accomplishments. It's breaking the cycle, proving that the Force can be understood and used in ways beyond what the ancient orders taught. He had the courage to question everything he'd been taught, to adapt when others clung to tradition, to risk falling to darkness in order to find a better path. Whether that makes him wise or reckless is for history to judge. But he changed the galaxy in ways the original Jedi Council never could. In the end, this alternate timeline asks fundamental questions about tradition versus progress, safety versus risk, individual paths versus institutional wisdom. Mace Windu represents the belief that when something isn't working, you don't just preserve it out of reverence for the past. You change it, improve it, or replace it entirely. The Jedi Order served the galaxy for millennia, but it failed when tested. Maybe it was time for something new. Maybe Mace's willingness to embrace emotion, to train older students, to fight rather than hide, to question rather than obey. Maybe that's what the galaxy needed. Not a restoration of what was lost, but an evolution into something better. Or maybe he's creating a disaster waiting to happen. An order of Force users who'll eventually turn on each other because they were never taught proper discipline. Who'll become warlords and tyrants because they embraced power too eagerly. Maybe the old Jedi knew what they were doing, and Mace's arrogance in thinking he could do better will haunt the galaxy for generations. There's no easy answer, no clear right or wrong, which is what makes this scenario so compelling. It's ambiguous, complex, full of moral gray areas and difficult choices. Just like the real galaxy would be. What if Mace Windu recruited new Jedi? Then the galaxy wouldn't have traditional Jedi. It would have something new. Something forged in the fires of the Empire's tyranny, shaped by pragmatism and necessity rather than ancient tradition. Whether that's better or worse than what came before depends on your perspective, on your values, on what you think the Force and those who wield it should represent. But it would definitely be different. And sometimes different is exactly what's needed.